The story begins on a quiet morning that felt like any other, the kind of morning where nothing seems out of place until the world suddenly shifts beneath your feet. I woke early that day, as I always did, to the sound of birds and the faint hum of the city beyond my window. The air was heavy with calmness, but there was something strange about it too, an unfamiliar stillness that I couldn't name at first. I made my tea, checked the time, and sat down at the small wooden desk that had seen years of hard work, sacrifice, and silent prayer. My phone buzzed with a notification from the bank routine, I thought. But what I saw next tore through me like a knife. Every rupee in my account was gone. Not a single trace left. The digits that had once held the fruit of decades of labor, sweat, and struggle now read 00. At first I thought it was a technical glitch. I refreshed the app again and again, my hands trembling slightly each time. The numbers didn't change. I called the bank immediately, my voice unsteady but trying to remain composed. The representative on the other end spoke with professional politeness, unaware that his calm tone was slicing through the chaos building inside me. "Yes, sir," he said. "The transfer was authorized under your son's joint access. The funds were moved yesterday afternoon." I went silent. My son? The same son I had raised with love, the one whose education I had paid for by selling my land, the one whose dreams I had built with my own hands. I asked again, certain there must be a mistake. But there wasn't. Every confirmation, every detail, every timestamp pointed to one undeniable truth: my own blood had emptied my life savings. He had taken everything and vanished. For a few minutes I couldn't breathe. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. Betrayal doesn't hit like thunder, it creeps in quietly, settles deep in your bones and freezes everything it touches. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was disbelief. Maybe there was an emergency, I thought. Maybe he needed the money for something urgent. But as I tried calling him, each attempt went unanswered. His number, his wife's number, even the mother-in-law's, all switched off. The silence on the other end of the line was louder than any argument we had ever had. Hours passed, and still I sat there staring at my phone, my mind replaying every moment we had shared. I remembered the time he was a child, clutching my finger as we crossed the road. The nights I stayed up late to help him study, the mornings I skipped breakfast so he could have enough to eat. Every sacrifice I had made now mocked me. I thought of his wedding, the joy in his eyes, the pride I had felt walking him down the aisle, unaware that one day that same child would turn my trust into a weapon. By evening, reality settled in fully. My account was empty. My trust was broken. My son was gone. I sat in darkness long after the sun disappeared, listening to the faint ticking of the wall clock. Each tick felt like a reminder of how helpless I had become. There were no friends to call, no family to confide in. Everyone had admired me once for being the man who gave his son everything. Now they would pity me as the man whose son took everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through every corner of the house, the kitchen, the living room, his old bedroom. His photographs still hung on the wall. In one of them he was smiling, holding my shoulder, proud and full of life. I stared at that picture until my eyes burned. Then I laughed, not from humor but from the cruel irony of it all. How blind I had been, how easily I had mistaken his greed for ambition. Days turned into weeks. I received no message, no explanation, no apology. I learned through neighbors that he had flown abroad with his wife and her mother, traveling in luxury, posting pictures online, beaches, expensive dinners, designer clothes. Every post was like salt on an open wound. The world saw them as a happy, successful family. None of them knew the truth, that every smile in those pictures was bought with my stolen sweat. People around me began to talk. Some pitied me, others mocked me behind closed doors. A few said, "You must have done something to deserve this." Their words cut deep, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was too broken to defend myself. I spent my days in silence, surviving on little food and endless thoughts. But beneath the pain, something else began to stir, something colder, quieter, and far more dangerous than anger. It was resolve. I stopped asking why he did it. I stopped seeking explanations. Instead, I began to ask myself one question: what will you do now? The answer came slowly, but when it did, it filled me with a strange calmness. I would rebuild. Not for him. Not for revenge. But for me. Because if he had stolen everything material from me, I would not let him steal my will to rise. I began with nothing, literally nothing but my knowledge, my discipline, and my time. I took small jobs, managing accounts for local shops, helping small businesses with paperwork. I worked quietly, kept my head low, and spent every spare moment learning. I read about modern finance, investments, and startups. I studied the mistakes that men make when they trust too much. My days became structured, my nights restless, but purposeful. Every sunrise became a silent promise: I will not die defeated. Months later, as I walked through the market, I overheard two shopkeepers talking about a new online consulting business that was helping local firms grow. I smiled. They were talking about me. The same man who once sat in darkness, stripped of dignity, now had his first taste of rebirth. It wasn't wealth yet, but it was hope. And sometimes, hope is the rarest currency of all. I never forgot the betrayal. I never stopped feeling the echo of that wound, but I learned to carry it differently, not as pain, but as fuel. I understood something most people never do. Betrayal may shatter you, but it also exposes your hidden strength. The man I became after losing everything was far stronger than the one who had everything. As I closed my shop that night and walked home, the streetlights flickered above me, casting long shadows on the road. For the first time in a long while, I felt no bitterness, only clarity. The world had taken my money, my trust, even my family. But it could not take my purpose. That was mine to rebuild, brick by brick, thought by thought. And that was how the story of my revenge truly began, not with rage but with quiet determination. The morning after my decision to rebuild, I woke up before sunrise. The room was still cold, the kind of chill that reminds you how alone you are. But this time, I didn't let that feeling break me. I made my tea, sat by the window, and stared at the dim sky. The sun was hidden behind heavy clouds, but I knew it was still there, waiting, like me, to rise again. The world outside had not changed, but I had. The same streets I had walked in despair now felt like training grounds. Every sound, every stranger, every small detail became a lesson. I stopped expecting kindness and started valuing knowledge. If my son had taken everything material from me, then I would build something that no one could ever take again, a mind sharper than betrayal itself. I began to work wherever I could find an opportunity. A local businessman needed someone to manage his accounts. I offered my services. A shopkeeper was struggling with his inventory. I offered to organize it. I didn't care if the pay was low or the work dull. Each task was another step towards something greater. My pride had already been taken. There was nothing left to protect except my determination. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, people began to notice my reliability. I was never late, never dishonest, and never loud. I became known for my quiet precision. I would sit for hours balancing ledgers, my thoughts running deeper than the numbers before me. It was in those numbers that I began to see patterns, not just in business, but in life. Every loss, every profit, every miscalculation told a story, and I realized something profound. Life, like accounting, always balances itself in the end. Every wrong eventually meets its correction. As money started to trickle in, I saved every bit of it. I lived simply, ate modestly, and spent my nights studying. I devoured books on finance, economics, entrepreneurship. I watched lectures online, learning from people half my age, who had built empires from nothing but ideas. And with every page I turned, I felt the old fire within me return, not the fire of anger, but of purpose. Sometimes, during those long nights, I would think of my son. I'd wonder where he was, what he was doing, whether he ever thought of me. But each time those thoughts came, I pushed them away. He was gone, and I was no longer the man he had betrayed. The version of me he had robbed had died that day. The one being reborn now was made of something far tougher. After a few months, one of the business owners I had helped recommended me to a friend who ran a small logistics company. They were struggling with finances. losing money faster than they could understand why. I agreed to take a look at their accounts. Within 2 weeks, I found the leaks, reorganized their budget, and turned their losses into small profits. The owner was impressed. He handed me a small envelope with extra cash inside. "You saved my company," he said with a smile. I only nodded. But inside, something stirred, a quiet recognition that I could still build, that I could still win. That job led to another, then another. Before long, I was handling multiple clients, managing finances, offering advice, and earning respect. People began to seek me out, not just for numbers but for guidance. They said I had a way of seeing things differently, clearer, deeper. They didn't know that the clarity they admired had been born from pain. Still, I never bragged. I kept my past buried, my heart guarded. Trust was a luxury I no longer afforded easily. I treated every handshake as a contract, every promise as fragile glass. I had learned that the sweetest words could hide the sharpest knives. One evening, as I walked home through the dimly lit streets, I passed a restaurant where families were laughing over dinner. The sound stung at first, a reminder of what I'd lost. But then, I realized something. I wasn't bitter anymore. I had reached a point where my solitude no longer felt like punishment. It felt like peace. The noise of the world was behind me, and the future was mine to design. Months turned into a year, and my savings began to grow. I rented a small office, nothing fancy, just a single room with a desk, a chair, and an old computer. I registered my own consultancy firm, K Solutions. The name was plain, but it held power to me. It wasn't just a business, it was a declaration that I had survived. At first, clients were few, but the ones I did have spoke highly of me. Word of mouth spread. Soon, small companies began reaching out for advice on managing their finances and investments. I didn't chase wealth. I chased efficiency, trust, and impact, and ironically, that's what brought the wealth. As my reputation grew, I started hiring others, people who were struggling, just as I once had, widows who needed work, young graduates who couldn't find jobs, single fathers trying to feed their children. I trained them, not just in numbers but in discipline, honesty, and resilience. They became my team, my second family, loyal not out of fear but respect. Together, we built something real. There were nights I would look around the small office, papers stacked neatly, the soft hum of computers filling the air, and I would feel something that I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the pride that comes from what others think of you, but the kind that grows quietly in your chest when you know you've earned every breath, every coin, every inch of your peace. I knew then that this was only the beginning. My revenge was not going to be loud. It was not going to be fiery or cruel. It was going to be calm, intelligent, and perfectly timed. Because true revenge is not about destroying someone, it's about rising so high that they must look up to see what they once looked down upon. That night, as I locked the office and stepped outside, the wind was cold but gentle. The moon hung high, and for the first time since the day my world fell apart, I whispered to myself, "I'm ready." Somewhere out there, my son believed he had won. He thought I had broken beyond repair, but what he didn't know was that every sunrise, every late night, every quiet victory was shaping the man who would soon show him what real strength looked like. And so the man who had once been robbed was now preparing, not for vengeance of fury, but for vengeance of success. Because the sweetest revenge isn't in taking back what was stolen, it's in becoming untouchable. As months turned into another year, my life began to transform in ways I had never imagined. The small consultancy that started with just me and an old computer had become something much larger. Clients began to recommend me to others, and my phone started ringing more often. People trusted me because I wasn't after their money, I was after their growth. I helped businesses find their strength, taught them how to manage their resources, and built systems that actually worked. In every decision I made, I could see the reflection of my own journey. Structure born out of chaos, discipline forged from betrayal. But success, no matter how gradual, comes with its own tests. There were times when exhaustion crept in. I worked 14-hour days, managing accounts, solving disputes, and guiding others towards success. My health suffered, my body often reminded me of my age. Yet every time I felt my energy fading, I thought of the day I had discovered my empty bank account. That single memory became the flame that never let me stop. It wasn't revenge that pushed me forward anymore, it was the desire to never be powerless again. Soon I began to realize that I could do more than just help others manage their businesses. I started studying the market, analyzing trends, and identifying opportunities. One evening, while reviewing financial reports of a client's failed venture, I noticed a gap, an unserved area in local logistics management. It was risky, but my instincts told me it could work. With careful planning, I took the bold step of investing my savings into a new company focused on small-scale distribution and digital tracking systems. The early days were brutal. I worked from dawn to midnight, hiring drivers, managing routes, troubleshooting software. There were days when deliveries failed, customers complained, and I questioned whether I had made a mistake. But unlike before, I didn't give up. I treated every setback as data, every failure as a teacher. Slowly, through countless adjustments and sleepless nights, the company began to stabilize. Within a year, the system I had built was being used by dozens of small businesses. My name started circulating quietly among local entrepreneurs, not as a victim, but as a man who built something out of nothing. I kept my identity low-key. I didn't show off my success. I didn't share my story. I preferred the silence. The fewer people who knew, the safer I felt. Yet the satisfaction of watching my creation grow filled me with a kind of joy I had forgotten existed. My employees respected me, not for my money, but for my mentorship. I taught them patience, taught them focus, and most importantly, I taught them never to underestimate time. Time, I had learned, is the greatest equalizer. At night, when the office was quiet, I sometimes sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. I imagined my son somewhere far away, living off my stolen savings, believing he had escaped responsibility. I wondered if his life was truly happy. Did he think of me at all? Did guilt ever visit him in his sleep? A part of me wanted him to feel remorse, but another part hoped he was suffering the way greed punishes those who let it consume them. I began to receive invitations to business events and seminars. Younger entrepreneurs wanted to learn from me, the man who had no fancy degree, no inheritance, but had managed to build success from ashes. At one such event, a journalist interviewed me. When she asked how I managed to succeed after losing everything, I smiled and said, "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to learn what truly matters." That quote went viral online, and though I didn't realize it then, it became the seed that would later lead my son back to me. The business grew beyond local borders. We expanded into neighboring regions, partnering with small companies and government projects. I created a digital app for tracking deliveries, one that would later attract international attention. Investors began to reach out. My quiet life started gaining noise, but I kept my distance from the spotlight. Fame was never my goal. My goal was stability, the kind of stability that no betrayal could shake again. Despite my growth, I lived humbly. My house was small but comfortable. My meals were simple, my days structured. I avoided luxury because I had seen how easily it blinds people. I had been blinded once, by love for my son, by trust that was undeserved. I promised myself I would never let emotion cloud my judgment again. Then one evening, while reading through business emails, I received a message from a foreign client. The name attached to it made my hands tremble. It was from a company based overseas, one that had been recently established, and the CEO's name was eerily familiar. It was my son's. For a moment, I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. The email wasn't addressed to me directly, but to my company, requesting a potential partnership for logistics support in South Asia. He didn't know who owned the firm. He didn't know that the man he had robbed years ago now stood behind one of the fastest-growing networks in the region. The irony was poetic. Life had come full circle, quietly, naturally, without me lifting a finger. I read the proposal carefully. His tone was formal, professional, as if he were writing to any potential investor. There was no sign of guilt, no recognition. I smiled, not with anger, but with an odd sense of peace. I realized then that revenge didn't need to be planned with hatred. It simply unfolded when you were patient enough to rise. I didn't reply immediately. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My heart was calm. I had imagined this moment so many times, but I never thought it would arrive like this, so naturally, so effortlessly. The man who had stolen everything from me was now unknowingly reaching out for help, and this time the power was mine. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I wasn't restless, I was thoughtful. The past and present collided in my mind, weaving a story so strange that even fate would have smiled at its irony. My son had left me with nothing but emptiness. Now that emptiness had built an empire. The next morning, as dawn painted the sky in soft hues of gold, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, "It begins now." Not a war of anger or punishment, but a lesson written by life itself. My time for revenge had come, not with shouting or violence, but with power cloaked in silence. He had chosen greed, I had chosen growth, and now, destiny was about to show him which path truly wins. The following months unfolded like a dream that I had once been too afraid to imagine. My logistics company, which began with only a few employees and a single rented office, had now become a name recognized across cities. My systems were being adopted by major firms, my software was being praised for its accuracy and reliability, and the quiet, calculated reputation I had built began to spread beyond my reach. What had started as a means of survival had turned into an empire, built not with inherited money or deceit, but with patience, vision, and relentless discipline. I had grown comfortable with success, not intoxicated by it. I still drove my modest car, still wore simple clothes, still carried a notebook everywhere I went to record ideas and numbers. But the world around me began to change. People who once overlooked me now sought my advice. Bankers who once refused to help me now offered me their best deals. Journalists called me a self-made mystery. I avoided interviews, preferring the silence of my work over the noise of attention. Yet deep down, I knew the story was far from over. One morning, as I walked into my office, my assistant handed me a letter from an international investor. The letterhead was familiar, the same foreign company that had contacted us months ago, my son's company. They had sent another request for collaboration, this time far more urgent. Their proposal was detailed, their tone desperate. Apparently they had lost major contracts due to supply chain issues, and they needed a partner in Asia to stabilize operations. I read the entire letter carefully, every line drawing me deeper into memories I had buried long ago. I leaned back in my chair, the edges of the paper trembling slightly in my hand. It was strange how life orchestrated its own symphonies of justice. Years ago, I was the one writing desperate letters begging for understanding, trying to hold my broken world together, and now, my son, the man who had taken everything from me, was doing the same. He didn't know that the man holding his letter was the father he betrayed. He didn't know that the very empire he was now seeking for rescue was built on the ashes of his own betrayal. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted time to think. My heart was calm, but my mind raced with questions. Was this the right time to reveal myself? Should I confront him, or should I let him fall further before I intervened? But as I stared at the city skyline through my window, I remembered the countless nights I had spent rebuilding myself from dust. I realized that revenge wasn't about making someone suffer. It was about teaching them the same lessons life had taught me: patience, humility, and respect for what truly mattered. That evening, I wrote a reply, posing as the company's senior director, not as the owner. My tone was polite but formal. I expressed interest in a potential partnership and requested a virtual meeting to discuss terms. When I pressed send, my fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. The game had begun. A week later, I sat in front of my computer. As the meeting began, my assistant joined the call first, introducing our company and discussing logistics. Then, as the camera switched to the client's side, I saw him, my son, older now, his youthful arrogance dulled by fatigue. His eyes carried the burden of sleepless nights. His smile was polite but strained. He spoke with forced confidence, explaining his company's struggles, promising future profits, and trying to sound convincing. I listened quietly, my camera turned off. Every word he spoke was like a whisper from the past. The tone of entitlement, the overconfidence, it was all still there, but beneath it, I could sense something new: desperation. His company was failing. The lifestyle he had built with stolen money was crumbling. I could almost see the cracks in his armor. When the meeting ended, I sat there for several minutes, staring at the blank screen. My emotions were a storm: anger, pity, and a strange, cold satisfaction. I had once begged him not to abandon me, and now he was unknowingly begging for my help. Life had a quiet, beautiful cruelty about it. I decided to proceed carefully. Over the next few weeks, my company began negotiations with his. I analyzed every document, every financial statement he sent. His business was worse than I expected: massive debts, unpaid employees, and legal troubles. He had burned through money recklessly, trusting the wrong people, just as he had once betrayed the right one. His arrogance had finally met reality. I signed a partial agreement, providing minimal support at first. I wanted to test his honesty, to see if there was even a spark of integrity left in him, but as the partnership continued, I realized he hadn't changed. He still tried to manipulate numbers, still sent exaggerated reports, still hid details he thought no one would notice. The same greed that had made him steal from me was still alive inside him. One night, as I sat in my quiet study, I poured myself a cup of tea and stared at his latest report. I saw the same patterns of deceit, the same mistakes I had once made by trusting him, and at that moment, I made my decision. I would teach him a lesson he would never forget. Not through confrontation, not through anger, but through experience. I would let him fall, completely, undeniably, and then I would be the one to decide whether he would rise again. Weeks passed, and his company continued to struggle. The pressure on him grew, his tone in emails became more desperate. Finally, he requested a personal meeting, hoping to secure a larger deal. I agreed. We scheduled the meeting in a luxury hotel where my company often hosted investors. I decided that the moment of revelation was near, but not yet. I wanted him to stand face to face with the consequences of his actions before realizing who stood before him. The day of the meeting arrived. I wore my usual plain suit, nothing extravagant. My team joined me, unaware of the personal storm brewing inside me. As I entered the room, I saw him waiting by the window. His back was turned, his posture slightly slumped. When he turned around, for a moment, neither of us spoke. He didn't recognize me. His eyes darted between me and my team, searching for some sign of familiarity. But I remained composed, my expression calm, my heart steady. We shook hands like strangers. His grip was weaker than I remembered. As we began discussing the proposal, he tried to impress me with technical terms and financial jargon, unaware that the man across from him knew every lie, every manipulation, every story behind his fall. By the end of the meeting, I had seen everything I needed to see. The boy I once raised into a man had not learned the value of loss. He had escaped accountability all his life, thinking success could be stolen or inherited. But soon he would learn the truth, that real success comes only through struggle, and that karma always arrives, even if it takes years to travel. As he left the meeting room, thanking me for the opportunity, I watched him disappear down the corridor. My hands were steady, but my heart whispered softly, "You have no idea who just shook your hand." The time for revelation was drawing near, and this time I would let the truth do the talking. The next few months unfolded with an intensity I had never felt before. My son's company continued to spiral downward, while mine grew stronger than ever. Every day, new contracts came in, new partnerships were formed, and my influence expanded quietly but powerfully. My employees worked with dedication, my systems operated smoothly, and my name had started to carry weight across industries. Yet, beneath that calm success, I carried a secret storm, the knowledge that my son's desperate company was now tied to mine, and that fate was slowly turning the wheel of justice in ways neither of us could stop. One morning, my secretary came into my office, holding a folder with a worried expression. "Sir, there's a new proposal from the foreign company," she said. I opened the folder and scanned the pages. They were requesting a financial extension, another loan, more time, more support. My son's tone in his letter was different now. The arrogance was gone. His words were pleading, cautious, almost humble. It was strange to read them. The same man who once showed no mercy to his own father was now learning what it felt like to ask for mercy. I decided to grant him what he asked for, but only partially. I released a small amount of funds, just enough to keep his company afloat, but not enough to save it. I wanted him to struggle, to feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulder. Every sleepless night he spent trying to fix his mistakes would bring him closer to understanding what he had done years ago. Weeks passed, and I kept track of every detail. My assistant provided me with reports on their financial activities, their project delays, and their growing debts. My son's name appeared in several business articles, some praising his past success, others criticizing his poor decisions. I read them all in silence, never once smiling, never once feeling triumph. This wasn't satisfaction. This was justice unfolding in its own quiet rhythm. Then, one evening, I received a message that made my heart stop. My son's company had declared bankruptcy. The news spread quickly. They had lost their investors, their clients, and their credibility. The empire built on stolen money had finally crumbled. I sat alone in my office after everyone left, staring at the city lights outside the window. The silence in the room was deafening. After all these years, life had come full circle. But destiny wasn't finished yet. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. My secretary informed me that a man and his wife had come to see me without an appointment. When I walked out to the reception area, I froze. It was him, my son, standing there, holding the hand of the same woman he had left with years ago. His mother-in-law was with them too, though she looked much older and far less proud than I remembered from the photographs I'd once seen. For a brief moment, time stopped. He looked at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. He didn't recognize me immediately. My hair was grayer, my posture more firm, my face hardened by the years. But as he studied me, realization began to dawn. His lips parted slightly, and the color drained from his face. "Father," he whispered. The word came out fragile, uncertain, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to say it. He didn't answer right away. I simply nodded and gestured for them to sit. My employees were stunned, watching silently as we walked into my office. Once the door closed, the weight of silence filled the room. He sat across from me, his wife beside him, both looking nervous, defeated. His mother-in-law avoided my eyes. He began to speak, his voice trembling. I didn't know it was you. I swear, if I had." I raised a hand to stop him. "You didn't know because you never looked back," I said quietly. "You never asked what became of me. You thought I would vanish after you took everything, didn't you?" He dropped his gaze. His wife tried to speak, but I cut her off too. "You don't need to explain. I already know. I saw the kind of choices you made. You had money, comfort, and a father who loved you. But greed made you blind. Now tell me, what brings you here today?" He hesitated, swallowed hard, and finally said, "We've lost everything. The company failed. The investors pulled out. We have nowhere to go. I thought maybe you could help us." The irony of his words was like a knife twisted in time. I had once said the same thing to him, asking for understanding, begging for compassion, and now he sat before me, wearing the same helplessness I had worn years ago. I leaned back in my chair, studying his face, older, tired, but still carrying the shadow of the boy I had raised. "Help?" I repeated softly. "You want help from the man whose life you destroyed?" He said nothing. His wife's eyes filled with tears, and his mother-in-law finally spoke. "Please, sir, he has suffered enough. We made mistakes. We thought we were doing what was best for him, for us. But we were wrong." For a long moment, I said nothing. The room felt heavy with unspoken truth. I could have shouted. I could have thrown them out. I could have reminded them of every tear I had shed, every night I had spent rebuilding from nothing. But instead I remained calm. My silence was louder than any anger could ever be. Finally, I said, "You will stay. I will give you work. But you will not receive it as family. You will earn it as employees. If you truly want a second chance, you will start at the bottom, just as I did." His head shot up, disbelief in his eyes. "You mean you'll take me in?" "I'm offering you a chance," I said coldly. "Not forgiveness. That must be earned." He nodded slowly. shame spreading across his face. I could see tears forming, but he blinked them away. His wife bowed her head, her arrogance gone. His mother-in-law sat silently, guilt etched deep into her expression. That day marked the beginning of a strange new chapter. My son and his family began working under my supervision. I didn't tell my employees who he was. To them, he was just another manager hired under probation. He worked long hours, endured criticism, and learned humility the hard way. I watched him quietly, not as a father but as a teacher. Each day, he began to change. The pride melted away. He started listening, learning, understanding, and though I still carried the pain of betrayal, I began to see glimpses of the boy I had once loved, the boy who used to look at me with admiration before greed poisoned his heart. Sometimes, late at night, I would find him still working, staring at the same spreadsheets I once struggled with years ago, and in those moments, I felt a quiet ache inside me, not hatred, not revenge, but something soft. Perhaps this was what true justice looked like. Not destruction, but transformation. He had lost everything to learn the value of something. And for the first time in many years, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, some wounds could still heal, even if the scars remained forever. The days turned into weeks, and I watched my son closely as he worked under my supervision. He was quieter than before, humbled, and far more focused. Gone was the arrogance that had once defined him, replaced now by weariness and a hint of regret. He arrived at work early, stayed late, and never complained, even when given the most menial tasks. I had placed him in charge of basic operations, far below the level of management he had once claimed abroad, and to his credit, he didn't resist. Perhaps he knew that this was the only way to earn back even a fraction of what he had lost. His wife, too, had taken a position in the administration department, assisting with clerical work. The same woman who once looked down on me, who had encouraged her husband to abandon me for comfort and luxury, now worked in silence, often avoiding my eye. Her mother, the woman who once flaunted her influence and mocked my simplicity, came to the office once in a while, usually waiting in the reception area, wearing clothes far humbler than before. Life had stripped them of their pride, and what remained was merely survival. Every day I tested my son in small, deliberate ways. I gave him difficult tasks, watched how he handled stress, how he treated others, how he reacted when things didn't go his way. I wanted to see if he had truly learned, or if this was just another act, another temporary humility born out of necessity. And slowly, I began to see glimpses of sincerity. One afternoon, while reviewing reports, I noticed a small error in a shipment order he had managed. I called him into my office and pointed it out. He looked nervous but admitted his mistake immediately. "It was my fault," he said. "I didn't double-check the details." His honesty caught me off guard. Years ago, he would have blamed someone else. Now he took responsibility without excuses. That moment, simple as it was, made something shift quietly inside me. As time went on, I began to hear from other employees how hardworking and respectful he had become. He treated his subordinates with kindness, offered help when they struggled, and never used his past position to demand special treatment. The same people who had once doubted him began to trust him. Watching this transformation stirred something I hadn't expected. Pride. It had been buried under layers of pain for years, but now it flickered faintly, like an old flame refusing to die. Yet I was cautious. I didn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I had spent years learning to separate heart from mind, and I wasn't ready to let forgiveness come so easily. I believed in lessons, not pity, so I continued my quiet. One evening, after everyone had left, I called him into my office. The lights were dim, the air heavy with the scent of coffee. He looked tired but alert. "Sit," I said. He obeyed silently. I handed him a file, a detailed financial report from one of our smaller projects. "I want you to lead this," I told him. "You'll manage the team, the budget, and the deadlines. It's your responsibility now." He blinked in surprise. "You trust me with this?" "I trust your ability to work," I replied flatly. "Whether I trust your integrity, that's still being decided." He nodded, eyes glistening with a mix of determination and guilt. "I won't disappoint you again." And he didn't. Over the next few weeks, he handled the project with remarkable discipline. Every report was precise, every team meeting was productive, and not once did I receive a complaint about him. He even stayed late to help his team meet deadlines. The results were flawless. When the project was completed, the client personally thanked our company for the professionalism and efficiency displayed. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my office, reading through his final report. It was thorough, transparent, and neatly organized, the work of a man who cared. I stared at the pages for a long time, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. He had finally become the man I had hoped he would be years ago. The tragedy was that he had to lose everything to find that version of himself. One day, as I was leaving the office, I saw him sitting outside, eating lunch from a small box. It reminded me of my younger days, the simplicity, the quiet focus. I walked up to him, and he immediately stood up. "Sit," I said, waving a hand. "You don't have to do that every time." He smiled weakly. "Old habits," he said, "or maybe just respect." We sat in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the city faint around us. Then softly, he said, "Father, I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I want you to know, every single day since that night, I've regretted it. I thought money would give me peace, but it destroyed me. I thought success was measured in wealth, but now I see it's measured in character. I'm sorry, truly." His voice trembled as he spoke, and for the first time I saw genuine remorse in his eyes, not fear, not desperation, but honesty. I didn't respond immediately. Words felt unnecessary. Instead, I simply nodded, then stood up to leave. That night I couldn't sleep. His apology echoed in my mind, breaking through walls I had built for years. The next morning, I made a decision. I called him into my office and handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, I said, "Is your new position and salary? You've earned it. From now on, you'll oversee regional operations." He looked shocked, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. "You're promoting me." "Yes," I said simply. "You've proven that you can work with honesty. Don't make me regret it." He stood there for a moment, speechless, then bowed his head. "Thank you, Father," he whispered. It was the first time he had called me that word with such sincerity since he was a boy. As he left my office, I felt a quiet sense of release. Revenge, I realized, had taken many forms throughout my journey. At first, it was about anger and punishment. Then it became about success, showing that I could rise above betrayal. But now, as I watched my son reclaim his integrity, I understood the final stage of revenge: transformation. Making the one who hurt you face their own reflection until they change. And that day, I felt it. The true victory. Not the victory of power or wealth, but the victory of seeing life complete its circle. The man who once robbed me had learned to rebuild, and perhaps in teaching him that lesson, I had also healed a part of myself that I thought was lost forever. The morning of the community event arrived with a strange stillness in the air. The sun was bright, yet it carried a sense of weight, as though the day itself understood something important was about to unfold. My company had sponsored a local charity drive, one that invited many respected figures, business owners, city officials, and several of my old acquaintances. Among the crowd, my son and his wife stood quietly, unaware of what was to come. They were part of the organizing team, working under my supervision, and to them this event was just another chance to prove themselves. To me it was the moment the truth would finally come full circle. As people gathered, cameras clicked, speeches were prepared, and volunteers moved briskly to keep things in order. My son looked confident, but calm, his wife by his side, offering polite smiles to the guests. No one there knew the story that connected us, how the man standing on the stage had once been robbed by the very person managing his microphone that morning. When the time came for me to speak, I stepped forward to the podium. The audience applauded politely as I adjusted the microphone. I looked around the hall, scanning faces both familiar and strange. Then my gaze rested on my son, standing near the back, watching attentively. For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, the same one who had held my hand during his first day of school. But then the memory of betrayal flickered through me like lightning, sharp and blinding. "Today," I began, "we gather to celebrate growth, unity, and the power of rebuilding lives. But before we talk about success, I want to share a story, a personal one. The room grew silent. Even the faint shuffle of footsteps faded away. Many years ago, I continued, I trusted someone with everything I had. My savings, my future, my dreams, all placed in the hands of someone I loved deeply. And that person took it all away. Murmurs spread through the crowd. I saw my son stiffen, his face tightening. I was left with nothing, I said, my voice steady. No money, no support, only pain. The people responsible lived a life of comfort, while I struggled to survive. But life has a way of teaching lessons not through revenge or hate, but through time. It shows you who truly changes and who remains the same. The hall was completely quiet now. I saw his wife clutch his arm, panic flickering in her eyes. He, on the other hand, looked frozen, pale, unable to move. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, I went on. I created something new, not just for myself, but to prove that integrity and perseverance will always rise above betrayal. And today, the very people who once left me in ruins work under me. Gasps erupted around the room. Eyes darted toward my son. Whispers began to spread like wildfire, the realization sweeping through the audience. He looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. I paused, letting the silence stretch, then continued. They didn't recognize me when I returned, but I recognized them. I gave them a chance to change, to understand what they had done, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I wanted to see if redemption was still possible. My son lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. His wife was trembling. The mother-in-law, standing near the corner, looked as if her pride had been torn apart in an instant. I looked at them all, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet power that only truth could bring. This story isn't about vengeance, I said softly. It's about accountability. The people who hurt you will one day face the weight of their choices, not through violence, not through hatred, but through truth. And when that moment comes, you will see the most powerful revenge is success built in silence. Then, I stepped back from the podium. The applause was hesitant at first, a mixture of awe and discomfort, but it grew louder as people began to understand. They weren't just clapping for me, they were clapping for resilience, for survival, for the strength it takes to rise after being destroyed. My son stood still as everyone applauded. His eyes were red, his lips trembling. When the event ended, he came to me quietly, away from the crowd. You could have hidden it, he whispered, voice cracking. You didn't have to tell everyone. I looked at him for a long time before answering. No, I didn't have to, I said calmly. But some truths deserve to be spoken aloud, not to humiliate, to remind, to make sure you never forget who you were and who you've become. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he nodded slowly. I deserve it, he murmured. Every bit of it. I've lived with that guilt every single day. And now everyone knows what I did. But maybe it's good. Maybe now I can finally stop pretending. For the first time I saw peace in his eyes, a painful, raw kind of peace that only comes after the storm has passed. His wife, too, approached, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, she said, for everything, for pushing him away from you, for mocking what you stood for. We thought money meant happiness. We were wrong. I didn't respond immediately. I simply nodded, then said, The only apology that matters is the life you live after today. Let your actions speak louder than your words. They left quietly after that, and I stood by the doorway watching them disappear into the afternoon light. My heart was heavy, but not in anger. There was a strange calm inside me, the kind that comes when you finally let go of something that has weighed you down for years. The truth had been spoken. The world now knew the story I had carried in silence for so long. And in that truth, I found release. I didn't feel like I had destroyed them. I felt like I had freed us all. Because revenge, I realized, isn't always about breaking others. Sometimes it's about breaking the silence. That evening, I returned home and sat by the window, watching the fading sun dip below the horizon. My heart was no longer filled with bitterness, only reflection. I had spent years chasing closure, and now that it had come, it didn't look like triumph. It looked like peace. The days following the revelation were strangely quiet. The whispers in the community faded with time, replaced by a respectful silence. People no longer looked at me with pity or curiosity. They looked with admiration. They saw a man who had endured betrayal, rebuilt from ashes, and emerged stronger than ever. But for me, there was no sense of pride or victory, only a stillness, the kind that comes when a long journey finally ends. For years I had dreamed of revenge, but now that it had played out, what I felt wasn't triumph. It was a deep, calm understanding that forgiveness carries a power vengeance never could. My son didn't return to work for several days after the event. I didn't ask about him, didn't send anyone to check. I wanted him to face the weight of truth alone. When he finally walked into my office one morning, he looked different. Not broken, but light. There was humility in his walk, clarity in his eyes. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood in front of my desk, hands trembling slightly, before saying, "I want to thank you." I raised an eyebrow. For what? "For not destroying me completely," he said. "You had every chance to ruin me publicly, more than you already did, but you didn't twist the knife. You just told the truth and let me live with it. That's a punishment greater than anything else." I studied him quietly. His words held no resentment, no bitterness. They were pure acceptance. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I want to rebuild properly this time. Honestly, maybe not under your company. Maybe I should start something small on my own. I don't expect your support, but I'd like your guidance, if you're willing." For the first time, his voice reminded me of the boy I had raised. Curious, respectful, eager to learn. And in that moment, I realized that my revenge had served its purpose. It hadn't just exposed his betrayal, it had rebuilt his conscience. I leaned back in my chair and said, "You don't need my permission to start over. But remember this, when you build again, build with integrity. Money can return, respect can be earned. But once trust is lost, it's gone forever." He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said softly, "and I won't fail this time." As he left, I watched him go with a strange mix of sadness and relief. He was finally free of the arrogance that had once consumed him. He had lost everything: wealth, pride, reputation, and in losing those things, he had found himself again. Weeks turned into months, and my son began his new venture, a small logistics company that he started from scratch. He didn't ask me for money, he only asked for advice. Sometimes he would visit in the evenings, sitting across from me as we discussed plans, challenges, and strategies. I guided him when needed, but never handed him solutions. He had to earn them. Slowly, his business began to grow. Not fast, not dramatically, but steadily, honestly. His wife stood by him through it all. She found work as a teacher, helping to support their modest household. The mother-in-law, who had once mocked my simplicity, now lived quietly, her arrogance dissolved by the consequences of her own greed. Life had come full circle, not through cruelty, but through karma. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, my son came to visit. He brought with him his little daughter, my granddaughter, a child I had never met before. She ran up to me with a smile that melted the last traces of resentment from my heart. "Grandpa," she said brightly, "Daddy says you're the smartest man in the world." I couldn't help but laugh. My son smiled too, eyes misty. "She's been wanting to meet you for a long time," he said softly. I looked at him, at his daughter, at the quiet life he had built from his mistakes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace, true, unshakable peace. "I wasn't smart," I told the little girl with a smile. "I just learned the hard way that life always teaches you, even when you don't want to listen." She giggled, not understanding, but I saw my son nod. He understood. That night, after they left, I sat alone and reflected on everything that had happened. I had lost everything once: my money, my trust, my family. But in the end, I had regained something more valuable than all of it. Revenge had burned away the weakness in me, and forgiveness had built something stronger in its place. People often think revenge is about punishment, but real revenge, the kind that changes lives, isn't about destroying others. It's about showing them the mirror of their own actions and watching them grow from it. I didn't need to ruin my son, I needed to help him see himself clearly. and once he did, the punishment took care of itself. In the years that followed, my son's company became stable and reputable. He never chased luxury again. He valued honesty and loyalty above all else. We began to rebuild our bond, not as father and son defined by blood, but as two men connected by lessons learned through pain. Sometimes I'd find him sitting with me after dinner, and we'd talk about the past, not with anger but with understanding. "I used to think success meant being rich," he said one night. "Now I know it means being respected, especially by the people who once had every reason to hate you." I smiled and replied, "Then you finally become successful." As time passed, the bitterness that had once haunted me faded completely. I had achieved everything I wanted, not just financially, but emotionally. My revenge had evolved into redemption for both of us. The circle of pain had been closed with understanding. In the quiet of my old age, I realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, but it frees you from being chained to it. My son's betrayal had once defined my life, but now it was merely a chapter, one that led to strength, wisdom, and peace. And as I looked out at the life I had rebuilt, I whispered to myself, sometimes revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about helping them change and finding your peace in the process. The night air was calm, the stars shimmered faintly above. I closed my eyes, letting the wind carry away the last remnants of my old pain. For the first time in many years, I felt whole again.